They were a raucous lot, these farmers and their wives. Had they already been drinking elsewhere all Sunday afternoon? Spirit grocery. Now she understood the driver's phrase. Not a haunted grocery, but one that served liquor. From their chatter, which touched on some extraordinary wonder they could hardly believe, although they'd seen it with their own eyes, Lib decided they must have been to a fair.
"'Tis the other crowd are behind it, I'd say,"
said a bearded man. His wife elbowed him, but he persisted.
"Waiting on her hand and foot." "Mrs. Wright?"
She turned her head. The stranger in the doorway tapped his waistcoat.
"Dr. McBrearty."
That was the name of the O'Donnell's physician, Lib remembered. She stood to shake his hand. Straggly white side whiskers, very little hair above. A shabby jacket, shoulders flecked with dandruff. A knob-headed walking stick. 70, perhaps? The farmers and their wives were eyeing them with interest.
"Good of you to travel all this way,"
the doctor remarked, as if Lib were paying a visit rather than taking up employment.
"Was the crossing awful? If you've quite finished,"
he went on without giving her a chance to answer. She followed him out into the shop. The girl, lifting a lamp, beckoned them up the narrow staircase. The bedroom was poky. Lib's trunk took up much of the floor. Was she expected to have a tete-a-tete with Dr. McBrearty here? Had the premises no other room free, or was the girl too uncouth to arrange things more politely?
"Very good, Maggie," he told the girl. "How's your father's cough?"
"Better, nearly."
"Now, Mrs. Wright,"
he said as soon as the girl was gone, and he gestured for her to take the single-rush chair. Liv would have given a great deal for 10 minutes alone first to use the chamber pot and the washstand. The Irish were notorious for neglecting the niceties. The doctor leaned on his cane.
"You're of what age, if I may ask?"
So she had to submit to an interview on the spot, although she'd been given to understand that the job was already hers. "Not yet 30, Doctor."
"A widow, yes? You took up nursing when you found yourself, thrown on your own resources?"
Was McBrearty checking Matron's account of her? She nodded. "Less than a year after I was married." She'd happened on an article about the thousands of soldiers suffering from gunshot wounds or cholera, and no one to tend them. The Times had announced that £7,000 had been raised to send a party of Englishwomen to the Crimea as nurses. That, Lib had thought, with dread but also a sense of daring, I believe I could do that. She'd lost so much already, she was reckless. All she told the doctor now was, "I was 25.
"A nightingale,"
he marvelled. Ah, so Matron had told him that much. Lib was always shy of introducing the great lady's name into conversation, and loathed the whimsical title that had come to be attached to all those Miss N had trained, as if they were dolls cast in her heroic mould. "Yes, I had the honour of serving under her at Scutari."
"Noble labour."
It seemed perverse to answer no, arrogant to say yes. It struck Lib now that the name of Nightingale was why the O'Donnell family had taken the trouble to bring a nurse all the way across the Irish Sea. She could tell the old Irishman would like to hear more about her teacher's beauty, sternness, righteous indignation. "I was a lady nurse," she said instead.
"A volunteer?"
She'd meant to clarify, but he'd taken her up wrong, and her face heated. Really, though, why feel the least embarrassment? Miss N always reminded them that the fact of being paid didn't lessen their altruism. No, I mean that I was one of the educated nursing sisters rather than the ordinary nurses. My father was a gentleman, she added a little foolishly. Not a wealthy one, but still.
Ah, very good. How long have you been at the hospital?
3 years, come September. Remarkable in itself, as most of the nurses stayed no more than a matter of months. Irresponsible scrubbers, Mrs. Gamps and the old mould, whining for their rations of porter. Not that Lib was particularly appreciated there. She'd heard Matron describe veterans of Miss N's Crimean campaign as uppish. After Scutari, I worked in several families, she added, and saw my own parents through their final illnesses.
Have you ever nursed a child, Mrs. Wright?
Lib was thrown, but only for a moment. I would expect the principles to be the same. Is my patient a child?
Anna O'Donnell.
I've not been told her complaint. He sighed. Something fatal then, Lib deduced, but slow enough that it hadn't killed the child yet. Consumption, most likely, in this wet climate.
She's not exactly ill. Your only duty will be to watch her.
A curious verb. That awful nurse in Jane Eyre charged with keeping the lunatic hidden away in the attic. I've been brought here to stand guard.
No, simply to observe.
But observation was only the first piece of the puzzle. Miss N had taught her nurses to watch carefully in order to understand what the ill required and provide it. Not medicine, that was the doctor's domain, but the things she argued were equally crucial to recovery: light, air, warmth, cleanliness, rest, comfort, nourishment, and conversation. If I understand you—
I doubt you do yet, and the fault's mine.
McBrearty leaned on the edge of the washstand, as if his strength were failing. Lib would have liked to offer the old man the chair if she could have done it without insult.
I don't want to prejudice you in any way, he went on, but what I may say is that it's a most unusual case. Anna O'Donnell claims, or rather, her parents claim, that she hasn't taken food since her 11th birthday.
Lib frowned. Oh, she must be ill then.
Not with any known disease. Known to me, that is, said McBrearty, correcting himself. She simply doesn't eat.
You mean no solids? Lib had heard of that affectation of refined modern misses to live off boiled arrowroot or beef tea for days on end.
No sustenance of any kind, the doctor corrected her. She can't take a thing but clear water.
Can't means won't, as the nursery saying went. Unless— Has the poor child some gastric obstruction?
None that I've been able to find.
Lib was at a loss.
Severe nausea?
She'd known pregnant women too sick to stomach food. The doctor shook his head.
Is she melancholic? I wouldn't say that. A quiet, pious girl.
Ah, so this was a religious enthusiasm, perhaps, not a medical matter at all.
Roman-Catholic?
The flick of his hand seemed to say, what else? She supposed they were virtually all Catholics this far from Dublin. The doctor might well be one himself. "I'm sure you've impressed on her the dangers of fasting," said Lib.
"I have, of course. So did her parents at the start, but Anna's immovable."
Had Lib been dragged across the sea for this? A child's whim? The O'Donnells must have panicked the first day their daughter turned up her nose at her breakfast and shot off a telegram to London demanding not just any nurse, but one of the new, irreproachable kind. Send a nightingale. "How long has it been since her birthday?" she asked. McBrearty plucked at his whiskers.
"April, this was. 4 months ago today."
Lib would have laughed aloud if it weren't for her training. "Doctor, the child would be dead by now." She waited for some sign that they agreed on the absurdity, a knowing wink, a tap of the nose. He only nodded.
"It's a great mystery."
That wasn't the word Lib would have chosen. "Is she bedridden, at least?" He shook his head.
"Anna walks around like any other girl."
"Emaciated?"
"She's always been a mite of a thing, but no, she seems hardly to have altered since April."
He spoke sincerely, but this was ludicrous. Were they half blind, his rheumy eyes?
"And she's in full possession of all her faculties," added McBrearty. "In fact, the vital force burns so strong in Anna that the O'Donnells have become convinced she can live without food."
"Incredible." The word came out too caustic.
"I'm not surprised you're sceptical, Mrs. Wright. I was too."
Was? "Are you telling me, in all seriousness, that—" He interrupted, his papery hands shooting up.
"The obvious interpretation is that it's a hoax."
"Yes," said Lib in relief.
"But this child, she's not like other children."
She waited for more.
"I can tell you nothing, Mrs. Wright. I have only questions. For the past 4 months I've been burning with curiosity, as I'm sure you are now."
No. What Lib burnt with was a desire to end this interview and get the man out of her room. "Doctor, science tells us that to live without food is impossible."
"What haven't most new discoveries in the history of civilization seemed uncanny at first? Almost magical?" His voice shook a little with excitement. "From Archimedes to Newton, all the greats have achieved their breakthroughs by examining the evidence of their senses without prejudice. So all I ask is for you to keep an open mind when you meet Anna O'Donnell tomorrow."